And the second I walked into the Orthodox Church, I knew immediately I'd found the truth. Immediately. Just the experience of the divine liturgy, seeing the love portrayed, expressed in the way that the church is set up, in the icons, in the iconostasis, in the way the priest carries himself, in the way that the parishioners carry themselves, the signs of the cross, the ancient Byzantine chants. I just immediately knew that I'd found the truth.
All right, welcome everybody to The Body Ascetic. My name is Matthew. This is our podcast series where we interview real folks sharing their real stories about encountering Christ in their discovery of and ultimately conversion to Holy Orthodoxy. Our guest today is Bartholomew, a young Australian from Melbourne. Bartholomew, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about your background, and we'll get into your discovery of the church.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. First and foremost, thank you so much for inviting me here. It's an honor to be on here and share my story to Orthodoxy. I think every time I hear about someone's story to Orthodoxy, it's beautiful. So it's great to hopefully be able to share that with other people and share that love. Yeah, as you already mentioned, I'm down here in Australia. I'm a pretty young guy. And yeah, I mean, Orthodoxy over the last couple of years has just completely captured my heart, captured my life, and so much so that I recently started, just like yourself, uploading some content onto the internet. And yeah, it's just been an amazing journey. It's hard to put into words just how beautiful Orthodoxy is, and also how beautiful the people are. Like people like yourself, people within Orthodoxy, the love everywhere. And yeah, it's just an honor to be here today.
Awesome. Yeah, we're happy to have you. Then definitely check out his channel at Orthodox Bart on YouTube.
Yeah. I actually have two channels, which if you don't mind, I shout out.
Okay.
There's my personal one, which is just Bartholomew. You can find it at Orthodox Bart. And then I've also started a very similar podcast channel, just like this, focused on Orthodoxy in Australia. It's called Orthodox Down Under. Down Under being a bit of a slang term for Australia. And so, yeah, if you're interested in checking out how Orthodoxy is going in Australia, please do. We need a lot of love, a lot of support, because Orthodoxy here, it's still a minority in America. So just imagine how much smaller it is in Australia.
Yeah, that's a good place to start actually, because I'm curious about that. I had thought Orthodoxy in Australia was maybe bigger than it is, only because I've been exposed to Australians that are Orthodox online more so than, I don't know, let's just say India. I don't know, or like, some other country like the Philippines, that are largely Catholic countries or Muslim countries or whatever. But I guess that may not be the case, right? You're saying it's very a minor element in Australia.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to be able to pull out any like statistic
No,
or
of
anything like
course,
that.
yeah.
I think all of that's pretty hard to do. But maybe compared to an Asian country such as India, Philippines, Orthodoxy here maybe has a bigger presence. But in my experience, Australia being a very Western country, having its roots within the Anglican Church, and then just being a very secular country, like this is something I hear quite often. A lot of people from the United States, they come to Australia and they don't realize just how secular we are. We're not Orthodox. We're not even Catholic. We're not even Anglican. We're not even Christian. We're like nothing. In fact, I heard it put a very nice way. In America, you might ask someone, and I'm sure you know there's still a lot of secularism in America, but you ask someone what church you go to. Whereas here in Australia, you ask, do you even go to church? So where, in my experience now, having been to the States, of course, I only went and visited one state and visited a monastery. So maybe my view isn't going to be as objective, but Christianity, just religion as a whole in Australia, is very underspoken about, underrepresented.
So you're born and raised in Australia, right?
Yeah, so born and raised in Australia. I was baptized into the Anglican Church, so the Church of England. So for those who don't know, Australia was colonized by the British Empire, and of course, the Church of England being the Anglican Church. So we have a lot of churches. Okay. There's a lot of churches in Australia. There's plenty of Anglican churches, as I mentioned, Catholic churches. And where I live specifically, being Melbourne, Victoria, we actually have the largest Greek diaspora of the world. So what that means is we have the
Mm.
largest Greeks outside of Greece in the world. So a lot of people came from Greece to Melbourne, Australia. So as a result, when the Greeks came here, they also brought their Orthodox faith. The point being is that there is a lot of churches. There is, like, if you want to find orthodoxy, if you want to find a church, you will find a church. When it comes to people actually practicing the faith, starting with myself, it's very hard to see.
Yeah. I think that's maybe why I had a perception that there was a bigger presence of Orthodoxy because of that Greek diaspora you're saying.
Yes.
Uh, so, so you grew up Anglican, but did you grow up going to church or not going to
No,
church?
no, no, no. So here in Australia, you're just baptized. Sometimes you're just baptized for the sake of getting into a school. So certain schools, certain high
Oh,
schools, like
hmm.
a Catholic school, they'll require that their students, it's probably not as strict today, but they would require that you would be baptized into the faith to go to their school. So you wouldn't be baptized for salvation. You would be baptized purely for worldly means to get into a school. So everyone just kind of gets baptized because, well, that's the thing to do. Like, you know, of course, starting myself, I'm not this pious saint, but a lot of people baptizing their children aren't necessarily baptizing them for, maybe the right reason, for salvation, for their faith. More just baptizing them because, well, that's the thing you do. So I was baptized into the Anglican church. Never ever went to church, and this isn't like a hit on my parents. This is just the way of life in Australia. Like, you don't go to church. And if you are someone who goes to church, you're looked at as a bit childish. You're looked at as a bit foolishness. Like, why would you need to go to church? Why, like, God? Like, what is that? It just doesn't
Mm.
really exist here in Australia. So I would describe my upbringing as just non-religious. The only time I'd be going to church would be to go to a Catholic or an Anglican church for a wedding, for a baptism, for a funeral. And that was it. I did go to a Catholic school. However, I always say that God was as invisible at this school as were people's morals. Okay, no one actually cared about the whole fact that we're at a Catholic school. And of course, starting with myself, people did not care about any of the religious aspects of life. That's all a lot of BS. And yeah, it's very sad, but it is the reality that I think a lot of people don't realize outside of Australia.
Yeah, well, especially if you look on a map and you see a bunch of churches, you'd think at least there's some
Yeah,
element
has to be
there.
religious, right?
Yeah. Kind of like Europe. I mean, Europe is a similar way, right? There's a lot of churches, and obviously, because Christian history is over 1,000 years there, right? Um, so, so growing up in this environment, lacking any kind of religious background or faith in your life, uh, what were the elements of that kind of fed into this? Usually people discover Orthodoxy because they're searching for something. Right. And they're usually searching for something because they're not satisfied by what the world offers. So, what was it that drove you to even discovering Orthodoxy in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I think you put it spot on. As we're all searching for something, and that was my situation. I think, you're a young guy. You look at the path ahead, and you look at the people maybe 10, 20, 30 years down the line, and you look at their lives, and these people, the lives that they have, the average Western life that you're trying to be pushed down. You look at them, and they're not happy. They're not content. They're not satisfied. Sure, some people are, but even then, it's like, what really is the ultimate purpose here? Like, I had a bit of an existentialist mindset. Like, what really is the purpose here? Like, is my goal just to go and become as rich as possible so I can buy the best house, the best car? But then I looked at the people who had the money, people who had enormous amounts of money, and I saw that they were still chasing more. So it was like, well, if I can't make the same mistake of thinking that once I get to their point, I'm going to be happy when I can look right now and they're not happy. All right. Well, then is the goal to, I don't know, be as famous, as powerful as possible, especially my generation. being in high school at a point where social media is at its peak. It's all about how many likes, how many followers you have on social media, how many people you can get to like you in the online space. Okay, is that my goal? But then I looked at the people once again who had all the followers, had all the likes. And in some cases, they were actually more unhappy. And so it's like a bit of confusion here. Everyone around me, the people who are in authority, are telling me to go down a certain route. But I look at the people going down that route, and more often than not, they're not happy. And even if they are, they're still searching, they're still yearning for something more. And this is when religion comes into play. This is what religion claims to offer. It's something beyond the material realm, something in the spiritual realm. But for all my existence, Christianity, religion was nothing but a thing of the past, a thing of people who had no food on their plate, people who were afraid of war. And so they had to cling onto religion. So I was stuck in this kind of like in between where it's like, well, I don't want to follow the world, but then why in the world would I follow religion? And so then I just went on a big search. I decided to actually look into Christianity. What actually is Christianity? What is actually the core of Christianity? Not what is other people's understanding of Christianity, not is what their perspective of Christianity is, but is there something that I'm missing? And then that kind of dominant effect to the whole search.
Where did you start in that search?
Oh, man. The thing is, I always knew about Jesus. It's pretty hard not to, especially if you're in a Western country, you got preachers everywhere, you got churches everywhere, everyone hears about Jesus. And he's always this pretty like mystical figure, this guy that rose from the dead, this guy that healed the sick and everything like that. And it's kind of like just this thing, this fairy tale in your head. But it's still attractive. It's this idea of being like a superhero, like a Superman. And I think within all of us, we crave for that. I think a very obvious example is as kids, we're obsessed with things like superheroes. Look at girls, they're obsessed with things like magical beings and all these fairy tale things. It's because intuitively we know that we're made for a world beyond the material world. We know we're made for a spiritual world. But Jesus Christ, as I knew him, as he was being represented to me by the Western world, just never felt enough. And not only that, but it was always known as this childish thing that people just clinged on for the sake of fear or whatever. And so there was a huge insecurity in me because I actually wanted to follow Christ. It was so attractive. But there was a huge insecurity in me of not being able to explain it, not being able to defend it. So I tried to fix that, solve that insecurity, especially by watching a certain influencer, YouTuber known as Cliff Peneckley. I'm not sure if you've heard of him.
Hmm.
He's that guy who goes around to university campuses and very kind of popular in the very Protestant evangelical space. And his whole kind of thing is trying to rationally prove the existence of God, of Jesus Christ, the validity of the Bible through evidence, through rationale. And this was very attractive to the Western mind because in the West, we're taught that if something can't be explained scientifically, well, then it doesn't exist. That's just the bottom line. Miracles don't exist because you can't scientifically repeat them. You can't prove them.
Right.
And so seeing someone try to scientifically prove Christ and all of this, the Bible, was very attractive. And I obsessed over that for like 1 to 2 years. But even then, I still felt empty. There's still something missing. And that's when I realized that when it comes to truth, when it comes to seeing whether something is real or not, there's something beyond the minds. There's things to do with truth other than just the rationale. There's things like spirituality. There's things like experience. And so this then led me to seek out experiences.
Yeah.
It didn't matter how much I could rationally explain God in my head and Jesus Christ. There was just still something in my heart always missing. And then the kind of domino thing that led to Orthodoxy was I had a coworker of mine invite me to a Pentecostal church. And I'm at this point in my life where like I really want to follow Christ. I can like rationally explain it and whatnot, but there's still something missing. And I thought to myself, this should be the answer. If I'm going to call myself a Christian, I should probably go to church Just like if you're in a basketball team or like you want to be a basketball player, you go to a basketball team. It's common sense. And he invited me to a Pentecostal church. Now, at this point in my life, I had no idea what the importance of the church was. I just really thought it was a thing where you just got together with people to worship Christ. Woohoo, you just had a good time. What could be the big deal? And so I go to the Pentecostal church and they were so welcoming. Like, I kid you not, at every door, yeah, and they have about 5 doors around the whole building. There's like 5 people at each door, like more than that, just welcoming you in. It was so lively, so energetic. And then we go sit down and it's in like this huge auditorium of like a school because, of course it's a very recent modern church. And the amount of people they have, they wouldn't be able to fit that in like a average Orthodox or Catholic church. And so it's this giant space and we sit down and right before the things get going, like the actual service starts, they ask who's new. And my friend, yeah,
Mm.
he grabs my arm, he puts it up, and this poor lady, yeah, comes running down and hands me a gift bag. It's got like a free Coke, it's got like a free drink bottle, a free letter. And I just felt so welcomed, like so welcomed. I'm like, this has to be what I'm looking for. Yeah. Fast forward a month or two, I'm kind of engaging in the community, going to the youth groups, and something just felt off. Something felt really off, but I couldn't rationally explain. I couldn't logically tell you why something was off. These people were some of the most nice people I've met. They were just worshiping Christ. One specific incident that led me to walk away from the Pentecostal church was an experience where after a sermon, a great sermon, like one of the best sermons I heard, they started doing a full-on concert. And look, if you want to worship God, how you want to worship God, at this point in my life, I'm thinking like that's for you. Like, who am I to judge? But that wasn't really the issue. The issue was at the end of the concert, things started getting really mystical. And they started doing what I realized in the moments is like a huge part of the Pentecostal church. They started
Speaking
speaking
in
in
tongues.
tongues.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this was my first really exposure to something very spiritual, and I did not know what to make of it. All I knew was that something felt very, very wrong. And at that point, I never returned. Then what led me to Orthodoxy was I kind of went, like a blank space without going to church. And then I recounted that story to my friend at the gym, and he started laughing. He couldn't control his laughter. And he told me, look, man, come down to the Orthodox Church. I had no idea what an Orthodox Church was. And we're sitting in the car ride on the way there, and I'm asking him all these questions. Like, what is the Orthodox Church? Why not the Catholic or the Pentecostal Church? Like, what does it mean to be Orthodox? What are the differences? And he humbly said to me, honestly, I'm not too sure about that stuff. I recommend going and asking one of the priests. And so I rock up to the church and I'm like so like ready to experience something totally new. And the second I walked into the Orthodox Church, I knew immediately I'd found the truth. Immediately. Just the experience of the divine liturgy, seeing the love portrayed, expressed in the way that the church is set up, in the icons, in the iconostasis, in the way the priest carries himself, in the way that the parishioners carry themselves, the signs of the cross, the ancient Byzantine chants. I just immediately knew that I'd found the truth.
Wow. It wasn't like a, what is this thing? I've never seen this in my life. Like, this is weird, reaction. It was like just immediate, like, this is it.
No, no. And when you live in the Western world, which, of course, that's a broad term, but, from my experience in Australia, such a secular country, there's no spirituality. There's nothing. There's no religion. And these things beyond the material world, such as death, such as love, such as prayer, um, they don't exist. They're not talked about. And so man being made for the spiritual realm is thirsting for this. And so it naturally makes sense that when he's exposed to it, it's like a thirsty man walking upon a fountain, not just a fountain of any water, but the most thirst fulfilling water in the world. But, however, I was still very prideful. And at this point, although I had experienced the truth and I knew intuitively this was the truth, I wasn't willing to accept it. I had to understand why. I had to be able to rationally explain why, because that's the kind of teaching, the programming, the conditioning I had, that you have to be able to rationally explain something. So I went on a huge search to actually be able to know and understand why the Orthodox Church. And, living in Australia, every corner you turn, every Christian you run into are all so different. You run into a Christian who might be a Catholic, who might be an Anglican, a Methodist, a Baptist, a Pentecostal, a non-denominational. You just run into everything. And so if I'm going to say I'm Orthodox, well, why? How am I going to be able to explain it to the next person? So then I realized I had to go back to the beginning. I had to read church history. I discovered that the church had a history. It was absolutely shocking. And I started learning about church fathers and saints. And this was a huge eye opener because at this point in my life, all I thought we really had was like the Bible. That's all we really had. But now I discovered people like Saint John Chrysostom, who was the Archbishop of Constantinople, who wrote stuff from the 4th century. Why had no one ever told me about this? And so I started looking at these writings and I discovered, and this was a bit uncomfortable. I discovered that the way that the Christians of the first, really all time, but, the Orthodox Christians, but especially the first 500 years, the way they understood Christianity, the way they understood Jesus Christ, the way they understood the church, the way they understood just everything, like from the sacraments, such as the Holy Communion, the role of a bishop, was so different to how everyone around me was understanding these things, like day and night, to the point where it was like I was learning about a different religion. Then I discovered things like the Great Schism of 1054, where, around the turn of the first millennium, the church splits into the East, the West, the Roman Catholic West, the Eastern Orthodox East. And so this was good because I discovered that more or less the church was one for the first 1,000 years. Of course, there were heresies, schismatics here and there, but more or less scholars agreed that the church was really united under one faith, one communion, for the first 1,000 years, and then it split into two. And so now all I had to do was figure out which one of those two were correct.
Narrows down the
And
choices.
yeah, which was amazing. Was really good. I didn't have to deal with the whole Protestant Reformation stuff unless I came to go down the Western route. Then I maybe had to deal with that. And that's a beautiful part of being Orthodox, is it's like you guys aren't really a problem to the Orthodox East because, well, you came from the West.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, what you said about trying to understand it in your head. I mean, this is what we can all relate to. Because I grew up Orthodox, but I'm born and raised in America, and the Western mindset is the prevailing mindset, like you're saying, and I have to understand things rationally and logically. And that's a big reason why a lot of people are atheists, because we've been handed down a Christianity that's been watered down so much from so many years of deviating from the truth of Orthodoxy, and then obviously starting with the Great Schism, and then Protestant Reformation reaction to the consequence of the Great Schism, and then you have splits in the Protestant Reformation that are reactions to the Reformation. So, and then it's just this spiral out of control. And so we get handed down that, and it's like, it's illogical. It, doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
You kind
Why
of have to
would
shut
you
your
be
brain
Christian?
off. Exactly. So it's like, so when you discover Orthodoxy, especially like when you're reading like the Church Fathers and how you're saying how they view things and what they say about things in terms of how the world works, how the church works, it's all logical. It all makes logical sense, and is actually makes you realize that Christianity is the most logical religion there is.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's amazing. I kind of had a different experience because, obviously you discovered Orthodoxy and converted, and it seemed like your mind had to catch up to where your heart was. See, I was born Orthodox and had this period of my life where I, kind of had a prodigal son period where mostly when I was your age in the 20s and late 20s. Um, when I kind of was rediscovering my faith and coming back to it, um, I understood it up here, but I didn't have it down here. So I had the opposite problem. I had to like get it in my heart, right? Um,
How do you solve that?
through, like you said, through experiencing liturgies, through experiencing prayer, through experiencing fasting, through um, essentially participating in the, like being Orthodox, like participating in the life of the church. Um, and I think there's a saint, I can't remember his name, but he was saying that he was basically talking about that specific issue. And his advice was that you do acts of love mechanically. And what that means is like, because, you know, someone like me, I don't really naturally have like love in my heart. I'm not like a loving, lovey-dovey person. Um, but you know, the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, right? So if you kind of force yourself in a way to do acts of love and acts of charity in a way that's mechanical, i.e., lacking, like it's
Yeah.
not done out of that love
Yeah.
that's
The
inside.
kingdom of heaven will be taken by force.
The kingdom of
This is
heaven will be
great.
taken by force, and then God will cooperate with you in those in the your sacrifice in those acts, and grace will come, and the love will come. It'll be given to you over time. So it's one of those things that's a struggle to a particular person like myself.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. That's interesting because it
Yeah.
just shows what unique experiences cradles have compared to converts and how it's a little opposite at times, which I never really thought about.
Yeah, I mean, and what's so amazing about Orthodoxy, because it's the truth, and like St. Paul said, there's no slave nor free, no Jew nor Greek. We're all one in Christ Jesus, and there's room in Orthodoxy for everybody, right? Christ calls everybody
Really.
to his church and to salvation. And that's one of the blessings of doing this podcast series, is also hearing all the diversity of stories of people coming from so many different backgrounds and places and parts of the world and different cultures and different ways of thinking, different perspectives. People that even were, you know, into satanic things and witchcraft and pornography and all kinds of, you know, things that they're still able to. No one's beyond salvation, right? God calls
Absolutely.
everyone, even at the bottom of the pit. And so
Yeah.
it's
Especially
especially
at the
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
actually.
So it's really beautiful. Okay, so what was so you went to Orthodox Church, you felt it in your heart that this is it, this is the truth. You still had some learning to do, reading the church fathers, and it was transforming your thinking and how you're viewing Orthodoxy. What was the timeline between that and getting baptized?
I think my first experience of the Orthodox Church was around, I think it was midway through Pascha or Easter last year. And then to getting, actually, no, it would have been the previous year, sorry. So I think 2024. And then I ended up getting baptized into the faith September last year. So it was about a year and a half of really immersing myself into the faith, learning as much as I could about the faith. Of course, speaking with a priest, multiple priests. And yeah, so about a year and a half of ups and downs, blessings and curses. And yeah, just one heck of an experience.
Well, tell us about those ups and downs. I know you have a video you talked about your
Yeah.
story, and you said that you went through hell in that journey.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, you have to go through hell to get to heaven. Um, it's, I think, one of the most beautiful parts of coming out on the other side of confessing the Orthodox faith is especially when you know what it's like to be on the other side, what it's like to be without the faith. You know, a lot of people, they look at converts and they're like, you know, sometimes we're a bit too zealous. And yes, we can be a bit too zealous, but it's like when you've gone your whole life without this, it's like, how can you blame anyone for not being a little too crazy um, about it? But yeah, so throughout that journey, as I mentioned, you know, I put myself through hell. And this is something I like to distinguish. I wasn't of course, everything's within God's providence, but it was very much something I put on myself, really just being very overtly rational. The biggest thing was whether I was going to decide to become Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. I knew a lot of Catholic Christians. I had a lot of family who were Catholic. The Catholic Church is the most known church. In fact, when people think of Christianity, they equate it with the Catholic Church. And the East, the Orthodox, is deemed irrelevant. It's deemed unknown. And so in many ways, it would have been a lot easier for me to become Roman Catholic. It would have been a lot easier than to become Eastern Orthodox and have to explain to every non-Orthodox Christian what Orthodoxy is, without them looking at you like you're some wizard. So that was to me the biggest thing, especially at that time. I had a manager of mine who was quite a zealous Roman Catholic, and he was what might be deemed a bit extreme. And so a lot of his understandings, a lot of his writings were very impactful on me. Not so much so that, hey, I was really considering Roman Catholicism, but more so that if I was to become Eastern Orthodox, I'd have to be able to say that all of this is just wrong. And am I actually able to say that? Do I actually know why this is wrong? And it's scary. As much as we can know truth, as much as we can sit here and say the Orthodox faith is the truth, when we say the Orthodox faith is the truth, what we're saying is that everyone outside of the Orthodox faith is living in a lie, whether unconsciously or consciously. And that's a scary thing to do. But there's really no other choice. You know, God would rather us be hot or cold than lukewarm. And so it just took a bit of courage to actually be like, okay, I'm looking at Orthodoxy. I see that it's the truth. I experience that it's the truth. Now, am I willing to actually go up in front of the priest, in front of the church, and confess that it's the truth? Be able to say to people who aren't Orthodox, people who I disagree with, that, hey, I believe you're wrong. And I don't just believe that you're wrong, but I'm actually going to go out and say that you're wrong through my actions. We can sit here all we want and be theologians, read as many books that we want, but there's a big difference when you actually start regularly going to a church, when you confess that church's faith every week, when you do your best to also guide others into that church. So it was a big journey of a lot of lows, to be honest, where I was stuck in between, do I become Roman Catholic? Do I become Eastern Orthodox? And not committing to one or the other was really impacting my prayer life, impacting my spiritual life, because of course, both the West and the East have very different understandings on spirituality. You read a book about a saint, an Orthodox saint, and you read a book about a Catholic saint, and they're going to give you very different advice, very different guidance. And I was yearning for that guidance. I was yearning for that spiritual advice. But then knowing that I haven't fully committed to one of them, well then, I couldn't really, be reading both of them at the same time when they contradicted one another. So it was very painful to be in that spot in my prayer life where I haven't committed to one of them. That was very painful. But coming out on the other side and knowing that I went through all of that, it's a huge blessing because I keep it with me for the rest of my life. I keep it with me when I meet people, beautiful people like yourself. I speak to my family, I speak to my friends, and I'm able to say to them, and I find this very, very valuable. I'm able to say to them that I didn't become Orthodox after I first learned about it, the next day. I didn't become Orthodox just because, it looked cool and the priest, was wearing some nice clothes. I'm able to say I became Orthodox because it's the truth. And I'm able to prove that by showing my journey, by showing my experience, by showing how I really considered alternatives, how I really considered the Western churches, the Roman Catholic churches, how I really took a good look at these churches, not just by looking at their theology, but, this is something I haven't mentioned yet. I even went and visited a Roman Catholic monastery here in Victoria. I went and visited multiple Roman Catholic churches. I watched multiple online Catholic YouTubers and heard, their understandings of prayer life. I watched way too many debates between, as I'm sure we all have way too many debates. And so as much as it is a very torturous and painful part of my life, you come out of it knowing that, hey, I did all of that and I never ever want to do it again, but I will happily talk about all of it.
Well, what was I guess what was the final like what made you make the decision for Orthodoxy over Roman Catholicism?
Hmm.
And I'll
There's multiple things.
yeah, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, like there's multiple things I could talk about. Like, you can talk about theology, church history, um, but the main thing was experience, and especially the liturgical life, especially the Sunday service. So one thing I was blessed to learn very early on was just how essential the liturgical life was to Christianity. And this was because outside of really Orthodoxy Catholicism, in a lot of the more modern day churches, the idea of a liturgical life is unknown. When you go to the Sunday service, you get a 60-minute sermon. And so as I looked into church history and I learned about the Divine Liturgy by St. John Chrysostom and how he's a 4th century church father who put this together, I was like, wow, yeah, the church the church of the 4th century was very different to the churches of the very modern, um, non-denominational churches of today. My point being, I was able to see how important the liturgical life was, and especially Holy Communion. This was something that was very foreign to me, something I never heard about in all my years of looking into Christianity, looking into Jesus Christ, was just how important Holy Communion was. And it was because my first experience of the Orthodox Church, everything was built around Holy Communion. Everything. Like that was the pinnacle. That was the highlight. That was when, Jesus Christ transcended, heaven and earth, condescended himself down to earth and met us where we were at. And there was this whole pinnacle. And I was like, okay, well, this really is the whole purpose of the liturgical life. And that's the whole purpose of the Divine Liturgy. And then what was cool was that I was able to go to the Catholic Church and see that that was very similar there. The whole point of the liturgical life within the Western Catholic Church and the Catholic Mass was also Holy Communion. That was the pinnacle. And so at that point, I was able to say, okay, if the essential part of the Christian's life is the liturgical life, and the essential part of that liturgical life is actually being in church, going to the services, experiencing, the main liturgy, which in the Orthodox Church is the Divine Liturgy. Within the Catholic Church, of course, it's changed quite a lot, but still being, the main service on Sunday. And then the main purpose of those services was the pinnacle being Holy Communion. Well, now I could just compare them. I could compare that experience. And when you go and witness a Divine Liturgy, and then you go to a Catholic Church, which does, the very modern post-Vatican II Novus Ordo, new Mass Order Mass, and you experience that, it's day and night. It is so, so different. Now, to give credit to any Catholic Christians before Vatican II, the traditional Latin Mass, no, it was a lot more reverent, a lot more beautiful. But the point being is that the normative means of expressing the liturgical life, the celebration of Holy Communion within the Catholic Church was the Novus Ordo Mass. And so I couldn't compare. No, I had a lot of Christians, a lot of people, especially those zealous Roman Catholics telling me, you have to go to the Latin Mass, you have to go to the TOM. And I was like, I respect that. But the bottom line is that the normative means in your church is not the traditional Latin Mass. If I go to majority of churches, I'm going to witness the Novus Ordo Mass. And so how am I going to compare some very minority, um, even, a type of carrying out the church that's being a bit suppressed, very clearly being suppressed. So how am I going to compare those two? That doesn't make sense. So I went and experienced multiple divine liturgies, and I went and experienced multiple Catholic masses. And the differences, as I already mentioned, was day and night. Day and night, especially when I see the way that the priest in the Orthodox Church treats the Holy Chalice, the Holy Communion. No one touches the Holy Communion except the priest. And even then, they are so, so meticulous. When they're dealing with the bread, they're getting off every scrape. In fact, I heard a story from one of the priests down in my local parish. He actually, well, I don't think it was he, but it was someone who was giving Holy Communion to. They mistakenly dropped it. And within the Orthodox Church, as a priest, if you drop the body and blood of Christ, you need to pick it up and eat it. And he thought, this happens. Cool, I'll go pick it up and eat it. Someone stepped on it.
Oh no. Still got to eat it.
So then he still had to eat it. Now that sounds insane, yeah? But the point being is that is how reverently Holy Communion is treated. It's treated as the body and blood of Christ. It's treated more valuable than gold. Then I went to the Catholic Church and I saw everyday people, everyday lay people, women, handing out the bread, the body of Christ. And I heard a statistic, and look, I don't really, I don't really know how valid statistics are. So like I say this to, I think anyone can just pull out any statistic, but I think it was 7 out of 10 American Catholics viewed Holy Communion as more symbolic than actually being real. And it made sense. When you go experience the Novus Ordo and you see everyday people holding the Holy Communion, and you see them not just putting it into people's mouths, although there are people who still do that, but once again, the normative means was just them putting it into people's hands. Well, of course, you're going to do this as a bit more symbolic. If this was the body and blood of Christ, well, we'd probably be treating it exactly like we see in the Orthodox Church.
Right. There's a Georgian saint that said that if you just knew how much grace there is in the Orthodox Church where divine liturgies are celebrated, you'd be like on the floor washing your face with the dirt from the ground.
Yeah, you'd be licking the ground.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's magical. And this is so misunderstood and not talked about enough in the West, because a lot of people come from these Western rational understandings. A lot of people who have been exposed to Christianity have been exposed to a lot of Western churches, whether it's the Catholic, Protestant, evangelical, non-denominational churches. And the liturgical life there is dead. It's dead. It's void of grace. And I say this not to be, an asshole here, but because I've experienced it. I've been to a Catholic and an Orthodox monastery. I've been to a Catholic and Orthodox multiple churches, and I've experienced it firsthand. And it's day and night difference. And especially in these more kind of modern non-denominational churches, there's such an emphasis on the sermon, on the hour-long sermon that's so calibrated to the everyday life, so perfectly intertwined to your everyday problems. So when these people who have been exposed to that come to the Orthodox Church, they're confused. They're like, so when does the sermon start? Especially when they come to an Orthodox church and they come to a Greek Orthodox church or Serbian, Romanian, Russian, and they may not hear English and they get very confused. Like, surely this isn't the church if it's not in my language, if it's not meeting my needs, my wants. And so a lot of people get turned off by it. But St. John Chrysostom said himself, the one who put together the Divine Liturgy, that if we were to actually be present in the Divine Liturgy and participate in the Divine Liturgy, and this is something I learned very recently, is that as the parishioners, we're actually meant to be participating in the Divine Liturgy, which is just a beautiful thing to learn about that I'm very sad that we don't do today, unfortunately. But if we were to be present and to be participating in the Divine Liturgy, there would be no need for the sermon. There would be no need. So if the very author of the Divine Liturgy said that, well, it's very clear that, the sermon's great. I love listening to a sermon as much as the next person, but the Divine Liturgy is where heaven meets earth.
Mm-hmm.
It's where God meets man. He condescends himself to meet man. And now you're telling me you want to listen to a priest talk for 10 minutes about the Bible? That's great. That is a big part of the Divine Liturgy, of going to church. But is that anything compared to God meeting you on earth? Nothing. Nothing.
Well, also the hymns and the chanting, like we get so much of theology through the hymns, and they're almost sermons in and of themselves. Just being in the liturgy and hearing the words, and if you're able to have a book that you can follow along, it's really incredible to do that. And the point about languages too is what I think another amazing blessing that we do St. John Chrysostom's liturgy, and that's not the only liturgy we do. We have St. Basil liturgy, we have other ones, but as a normal Sunday liturgy, it's St. John Chrysostom's. When you're used to and familiar with the St. John Chrysostom liturgy, obviously I've been going to them my whole life, but I can go to a Greek church, I can go to a Serbian church, I can go to a Russian church, and it doesn't have to be in English. But I know what's happening. I know where we're at in the service. I know generally what's being said. And what's amazing about that is I can participate. I can, even without knowing the language, I can worship just as if it was in
Yeah.
English, right? And that's such a blessing because, um, and I'm not going to throw shade on the Oriental Orthodox, but that's something that the Oriental Orthodox don't have. The Coptics, Armenians, Ethiopians, they all perform different liturgies, and they have amazing
I
liturgies. I
didn't know
mean,
that.
they have like
Yeah.
St. James liturgies.
Yeah.
They have amazing liturgies. They do St. Basil as well. But and I know this from Oriental Orthodox. Like I have friends that are Oriental Orthodox. Like if you're Coptic and you go to a Ethiopian church, 9 times out of 10 you're gonna have no idea what's going on because they're gonna be doing a
Wow.
different liturgy.
Yeah.
And if it's in a different language, obviously, like you can't follow it. So it's amazing that in the Eastern Orthodox Church, when we're all celebrating St. John Chrysostom liturgy together on a Sunday, the whole Orthodox world, literally across the globe, is in
Yep.
unison,
Yep.
right? And it's
Same one.
it's an expression of unity. So it's really beautiful. So Orthodoxy, because it's the truth, it's harsh, right? The truth is harsh.
The most harsh. The most
Yeah.
harsh. Like the most alien to the everyday world. And the more and more like I read books, like I recently picked up a book from St. Anthony's Orthodox Monastery in Arizona on the life of St. Joseph the Hesychist. And if I would have read this book before I came Orthodox, mate, I would have I would have said this guy belongs in a mental asylum. Even today, reading this stuff, it's like this is extreme. This is difficult to hear. Now, of course, this is a small expression of the broad Orthodox spiritual life, but you read that as you read more about the lives of the saints and the Orthodox spiritual life, especially when you experience it and you see that it does work, that helps. If you weren't to experience it and see that it works, you'd be like, get me away from this stuff. But it is foreign to the everyday world. I mean, you know this. It's so alien to the everyday world. And that makes sense because, what's wise to Christ is foolishness to the world. Hey?
Yeah, exactly. And the West, particularly like the Protestant Baptist West, has no real concept of asceticism, right? And I'm assuming you, Bartholomew, growing up uh, uh, without really any understanding of Christianity and the faith, you didn't have a sense of asceticism.
Oh no, 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 the opposite, my friend. The opposite.
Yeah.
And this is something I did to myself. This is a big part of my journey that I haven't mentioned was I got big into, like we're all made for Jesus Christ. So we're all going to be yearning for Jesus Christ. And if we don't find Christ in Christ himself, we look to find Christ either in ourselves or in celebrities, in influencers, in just people out there. And this is especially apparent in the West today, especially amongst young men who are yearning for Christ, but are looking for Christ in a lot of online influential figures who tend to be very big on the whole kind of masculinity, discipline things that, I don't need to mention their names. We all know these people online. And this was a huge thing that I obsessed over. I got big into obsessing over these influencers because we cannot blame young men for this. They're yearning for Christ and they're able to find a lesser version of Christ in a lot of these online influential masculine men. And these masculine men, whatever you want to say about them, they do preach things like discipline. They do preach things like going to the gym. They do preach things like looking after your diets. It's a form of asceticism. It's definitely not the asceticism that we're made for in Orthodox spirituality. And I obsessed over a lot of this. I got big into the gym. Spent like 2 years going 7 days a week to the gym. It's like tracking every calorie, my friend. Like meticulously tracking every calorie down to the grain because I was so yearning for Orthodox spirituality. I was so yearning for a set, disciplined way of life. And I never knew about Orthodoxy, so I have to find it somewhere. But the biggest difference between the asceticism of the West is that it preaches this idea of you becoming your own Christ. So you becoming your own Superman, you overcoming death through your own means. And if this is not more apparent today than ever, I don't know what to say. This is especially found in that one influencer who I'm not sure if you know, but he's very popular, whose whole kind of mission is to kind of overcome death. He's trying
Yeah.
to live as long as possible.
I mentioned
Yeah.
it a few times in my videos.
Yeah. If this is not the most antichrist thing, I don't know what is. Because here's the thing, we don't blame this person. I don't think he's ever been exposed to Orthodox Christianity. We pray for him. But man knows that he's made to live forever. He knows that he's made for Christ. And because we all have a problem with death. We all have a problem with death. It doesn't make any sense to us. You're telling me I'm going to live my whole life, Matthew, yeah? And I'm going to have these amazing experiences. I'm going to experience love. I'm going to experience joy. I'm going to experience sadness. I'm going to experience grief. I'm going to have the most beautiful experiences ever. And then it's just going to done. It's just going to wither away into non-existence and, just just nothingness. That doesn't make sense to our mind. And so we attempt to immortalize ourselves. And if we don't immortalize ourselves through Christ, we immortalize ourselves in this world by writing books, by starting YouTube channels. Not that, not that this is you, but my point is that a lot of people do that. Yeah. Of course, I run a YouTube channel myself, but doing stuff like that, where you're trying to immortalize yourself on the internet, grow your Instagram page to 1 million followers, build your own business, and make sure your last name, your surname is in your business. We just really attempt to immortalize ourselves. And this is so much more easy to do in this internet age, in this technological age. And it's something I tried to do myself. I tried to start my own business on this. I tried to have my name in it. I just tried to immortalize me. I tried to build the best physique I could. I tried to be the healthiest person I could so I could live as long as I could so I could avoid death, because I know I'm not made for death. But the thing is, it doesn't matter how many subscribers and Instagram followers and money you have in your bank accounts. It doesn't matter how jacked you are, how good your abs looked. It doesn't even matter how many kids you have, and this is something that's, you know, not spoken enough, and it might be very alien to the modern world. But a lot of people try to immortalize themselves through having children, tons of children, and living through their children. We all know parents who identify so much with their kids that it's as if they're one with their kids, because we try to live through everything but Christ. But as I said, it doesn't matter how many kids we have, how much money, followers, fame. We're all set for the same fate. We're all going to die. And the sooner we can
Yeah.
realize that.
Yeah, and what you're describing is the pagan mentality, right? And as the world rejects Christianity and their Christian heritage more and more, we basically just revert back to paganism. And what did the pagans? What was like their crowning achievement that they wanted to achieve was glory, and their name being spoken of for 1,000 years, through battle and feats of power
Mm,
and will, right?
yeah,
It's all pagan mentality.
yeah,
So that's really interesting that you mentioned that.
yeah, yeah. All like the Julius Caesars, the Alexander the Greats. It's like, sure, we might remember their names today, but 2,000 years from now, they are going to wither away. So interesting. I didn't know that.
Right. Yeah.
Well, we're just repeating history.
History is humans being humans over and over and over, right?
Yeah, but we try to convince ourselves that that's not the reality. We try to convince ourselves that, we're getting somewhere, that
Yeah.
we're advancing. But then you read some of the church fathers and it's like, yeah, we're not advancing.
Oh man, even in
Yeah.
Ecclesiastes, which was what 1,000 BC, it says there's nothing new under the sun. Everything that has been done, everything that will be done has already been done, and those that come after won't have any remembrance of things that were before, and it's just basically just they're saying that 1,000 BC that everything's already been done and it's just repeating itself. So
Yeah.
that should tell you something, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, cool, man. We're getting to the top of the hour, so I'd like to end us off with asking you: do you have any advice for let's say, people in similar situations as you, or maybe some young men have discovered Orthodoxy and they're inquiring into it. Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, action, 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 action. I have, being a convert myself, being living in Australia where people aren't religious, I have a lot of people around me, family, friends who aren't Orthodox, who come to me with the same human problems that we all have, and I just encourage them, go and visit an Orthodox divine liturgy, go and speak with a priest. And very often I see that these people just don't take action. They don't. Um, they're willing to talk about their problems for hours on end, but when it comes to actually going and visiting a divine liturgy and speaking to a priest, I see nothing. I see nothing. And now, of course, you know, it's difficult. When I give advice to other people who were, in former situations to me, I say to them, go visit a church. I fully acknowledge that living in a place like Australia or wherever you live, that you might have family who aren't religious. You might have friends who are going to judge you. And so, yeah, it's going to be difficult. My first time walking to an Orthodox church, I stuck out like a sore thumb. I was the most, what in the world am I doing? Why am I doing a bunch of these a million times? When do I stand up? When do I sit down? I was convinced that everyone was staring at me. But the reality is that if you're not gonna try now, if you're not gonna put the effort in now, if you're not gonna go to church now, if you're not gonna go and develop a relationship with a priest and have a spiritual father now, when are you? Tomorrow? Tomorrow is not guaranteed, my friend. And very rarely you're gonna find someone who's overcome that difficulty of getting things going and who regrets it. Yeah, it's not going to happen. And so to anyone out there who's interested in orthodoxy, just look at your local church and just call up the priest. And God willing, he won't bite your head off. And he'll say, yeah, come on down. Let's have a chat. You don't even have to go to a divine liturgy where you're surrounded by people. You can just sit down with the priest. And yeah, I mean, it's very simple. And this is the beauty of the Orthodox Church is it's simple. There's nothing. You don't have to be a theologian. You don't have to be perfect. In fact, it's better if you're not a theologian. It's better if you're imperfect. Um, so yeah, action and humility, and just zooming out. One thing I thought to myself was, if I'm not going to develop a church life now, when's it going to be? When I want to marry? When I want to have children? Well, it'd probably be better for their sake if I got it going now.
Very wise words from a very fine young man.
Now, thank you. Glory to God.
Glory to God. And it'll also help to follow his channels, Orthodoxy Down Under
Yeah,
and
Orthodox Down Under, and yeah,
Orthodox Bart. Yeah,
but there's plenty of other good channels out there. Plenty. There's a plethora of Orthodox wealth out there. Trust me, if you're looking for good Orthodox content, probably stay away from my channels.
Well, I appreciate you, Bartholomew, for coming on. This was a lovely conversation. I'm sure everyone enjoyed it. And yeah, um, that's it for us today. Appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Godspeed.
Take care, everyone.